The Mutual Broadcasting System presents STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk with retired Marine Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer. Now, here's Hal.
Welcome to STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk, and I'm going to discuss what has clearly been the biggest story going on out there, and that is the U.S. seizing Nicolás Maduro, the illegitimate president, if you want to use that term, of Venezuela, and also taking his wife and whisking him off to the United States to stand trial. Truly an amazing operation. I'm going to talk about that and what it was, and talk about Venezuela, explain what happened, and kind of get into what's next. And believe me, if anyone out there is confused as to what's next, you're not alone. You're not alone. All right. Now, you may know that early Saturday morning of January 3rd, that the U.S. conducted an amazing surprise overnight operation to, if you want to say detain, if you want to say arrest. My understanding was there was law enforcement that was with the teams that went in there and basically incarcerate Nicolás Maduro, and they also took his wife, who both have a bunch of indictments against them in U.S. federal court. This operation was months in the making. Apparently, it had been in kind of the ready to punch the button since mid-December, and they were waiting for just the right time. You may recall that there's been a few things going on around the world, not the least of which is the U.S. doing strike operations in northern Nigeria, and a variety of other things, not the least of which was there was a really bad weather front that was sitting on top of Venezuela for days. And when it finally cleared out, that's when they made the decision to go in there and conduct this operation. It involved over 150 aircraft and drones. It integrated space and cyber effects. It had multiple intelligence agencies across the spectrum, multiple law enforcement agencies involved, and it was just really something to behold. And what's really amazing is all of this was done. Not one U.S. service member was killed, although some were injured. And we're finding out more about these injuries. And some of them were injured, and they continued to conduct the mission. And there's pretty tough determination, the stories coming out of this whole thing. Explosions were reported around Caracas, Venezuela's capital city. All these things were designed to basically shock, awe, disable, disrupt command and control, everything with the Venezuelan forces. Also, although they haven't really talked that much specifically about it, clearly they were engaging in suppression of enemy air defenses to carve out a corridor so that the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment of the Army, which does a number of things, but supports Tier 1 operators, brought in Delta Force, the Army's most elite special operations force, and they went in there and actually conducted the raid and pulled the Maduros out, if you will. And once they were out, they took them back to a ship, the Iwo Jima, and then they were moved to to Guantanamo for a short period of time, and then they were flown directly up to New York. It is really amazing how fast this worked. Now, they are indicted in the Southern District of New York on narco-terrorism charges, weapons charges, a bunch of other things. And Monday, January 5th, they both entered not guilty pleas in federal court. And it's going to be probably an interesting trial. It's going to take many months, if not years, before it's finally done. But here's the thing that's interesting is they went to bed Friday night in Caracas at one of their mansions or one of their compounds, and they went to bed Saturday night in a federal detention facility in New York City. Talk about quite a change. Now, there was a press conference in Mar-a-Lago Saturday right after this took place by President Trump and several of his top advisors, and they revealed a lot of details about the mission. The name of it was Operation Absolute Resolve, and they said that Venezuelan military capacities had been rendered powerless by our tremendous men and women of our military, and we captured Maduro in the middle of the night, and it was dark. Caracas's lights were largely turned off, and it was due to our expertise. And by the way, not a lot out there on whatever the CIA was doing, but in this mission, it seems like the CIA was doing a lot, and they were doing it well. A large part of Maduro's security team, and of course, Venezuelans claim a number of innocent civilians, but a large part of the security team were killed in the operation. And what's coming out is possibly 32 Cubans. And these are Cuban military advisors. Some of them may have been part of the security force protecting Maduro. It was often reported that he had turned to Cubans to protect him because he didn't trust his own security forces, but they were also reportedly have been killed in this operation as well. And Venezuela's defense minister, Vladimir Padrino, said at a televised conference that, talked about all the deaths and stuff like that. He is one of the main power centers in there that is there. Now, what Donald Trump has said is that the U.S. is going to be involved with running Venezuela. I'm not quite sure what that means. And that the oil production in the country is, with the help of U.S. oil companies, is going to come back on. And that a lot of that money from that is going to go to help the Venezuelan people. And you may recall that Venezuela's oil, the U.S. was in Venezuela, oil companies in Venezuela in a major way, always have been. And around 2006, 2007, Hugo Chavez, who was then the president of Venezuela, basically federalized or nationalized. When he nationalized, he just took a lot of these private oil assets. Now, Venezuela has decisions in international court where they owe the oil companies billions of dollars for what they seized. But here's the thing. If you want the oil companies to go in there, they're going to have a high degree of confidence that they're not going to be risking billions of dollars of investment trying to get that oil production back up. Oil production in Venezuela is somewhere between 1/4 and 1/5 of what it was before Chavez started nationalizing companies. So there is so much work to be done. The infrastructure is dilapidated. It is an absolute mess. And so, and we're saying we're running it, we're going to fix it, but it's not just something where the president says you're going to go do it. The oil companies have to have a assured investment strategy that what they're doing is not going to be throwing money away, and some future regime may turn around and nationalize everything that they did. Now, Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism, as I mentioned. He's been charged with weapons things. World leaders have been kind of mixed. Some, obviously Russia, North Korea, China, very condemnatory. Going to the UN Security Council, try to get a resolution against this, which is not going to happen. Some of the mixed result or mixed feedback coming out of Europe. It was interesting. Keir Starmer of Britain went to great pains to say he didn't say outright he opposed what happened, but he said we had nothing to do with this, and he made sure everybody knew that Britain had nothing to do with this. Interesting, Merz over in Germany seems to be somewhat supportive of what's going on there, and Israel, not surprisingly, was very supportive of what the U.S. did. Now, Delcy Rodríguez was the illegitimately elected vice president. She has been named Venezuela's acting president since she was the vice president. And the Supreme Court there has recognized her as the acting president, and the military has recognized her as the active president. Now, I'm going to say something. Everything I've seen says that she has a long history in Russia and with Moscow, and she may or may not be a Russian intelligence asset, but there are a lot of people who are absolutely sure she is a Russian intelligence asset. In fact, when this whole thing happened, there was a lot of thought that she was actually in Russia when this thing took place. So very interesting that she would be that, because she would be taking over, because President Trump, when this happened, basically said we're going to work with her and work with their regime, and not the opposition, not the folks that were legitimately elected in the last election, but work with her. And part of that seems to be, and it wasn't said quite this way, but that she would have the support of the military and the security apparatus. And so we wouldn't do what we did in Iraq, which is we basically stood down the Iraqi military and the police force, and the country just drifted into horrific anarchy. So we're trying to work with her, but her rhetoric has been very negative so far, to the point that I think it was Sunday, after this took place that President Trump kind of seemed to reverse himself a little bit, said if she doesn't go along with what we're saying, that her fate may be worse than Maduro's. Now, we just took Maduro prisoner, whisked him off to New York, where he's facing charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. So you can imagine what's one step worse than that would involve the military if we were to take action against her. That would be a rather interesting situation. I think it's closest you can do to making a death threat without making it absolutely clear it's a death threat. But I do see this as kind of a real politic thing. You know, President Trump, he's seen what we've done with other countries. Don't forget, this is not brand new. We had experiences in Panama in 89 with Noriega. That was somewhat successful. Noriega went to prison, and we were able to change the Panamanian regime, and it seemed to work out pretty well. Then there was Haiti, and Haiti was kind of successful, but it's Haiti. And Haiti just has never really been successful in any way, shape, or form. And it's just, you can't overcome this macroeconomic issues and other things they're dealing with Haiti. And so Haiti's obviously got a lot of problems today. We stepped in and, we kind of supported the opposition and taking out Muammar Gaddafi in Libya in 2011. So there's just, there's been a lot of stuff going on. And don't forget, as I mentioned before, Iraq and our experience there. So we're kind of trying to take some of those lessons learned, I think, in what we're doing here. But we keep saying, well, we run Venezuela. I don't know how we run Venezuela. And this kind of gets into what comes next. Despite what we're saying, we don't have an invasion force sitting offshore. We don't have an invasion force standing by to go in there. We're not going to invade and try and take over that country. That country is huge. North-south, it's like from South Carolina up to New York City, and then east-west, it's like from New York City to Chicago. It is an enormous country. You got millions and millions of people that many of, even if 2/3 of them are support of what we're doing, there's 1/3 that definitely does not support what we're doing. And the longer we're there doing it, the less support we'll have. That's just kind of occupation 101, if you will. And so it would be very, very difficult, I would say pretty much impossible to do that. And I don't see the American people getting really behind this idea of getting drugged into another Iraq occupation or Afghanistan occupation type of situation. Now, Maria Machado, Edmundo Gonzalez was actually who won from the opposition because she wasn't allowed to run in the last election, but she actually was the political leader of the opposition party. They're kind of just sitting off, I'm not going to say twisting in the wind, but they are kind of sitting off on the side right now because there's no way to put them into office anytime soon. And so right now they're just biding their time. And I think the idea is that Rodriguez would be an interim leader, and at some point we get an election in place, and then the opposition would come in and take over after that. But one of the things that's also coming after this is what is the next country that could run the problems? And the next country would be Cuba. Cuba is very, very dependent on Venezuelan oil. And with us blockading Venezuelan oil as we do now, and certainly with us exerting some degree of control on what's happening with Venezuelan oil in the future, which is what President Trump's alluding to, that Cuba kind of gets left off in the cold. And if they don't have access to oil, they pretty much cease to operate as a functional nation state. And that country is in horrible shape economically. Its infrastructure is arcane, or not arcane, but its infrastructure is old, it's broken down. And the other problem is that they don't produce enough there to really support the population. So they have problems, and they've had these massive hurricanes that the response and the recovery just were completely inadequate for. So they've got huge problems. So it's very possible, and I think Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, would be thrilled if Cuba's regime was to be overthrown by its own people. And what else could happen after that? Well, it just depends. There was even talk about Colombia. We're really not thrilled with at least certainly the Trump administration is not thrilled with the leftist president of Colombia. So, he made reference to that. And there was another reference made to Greenland, to which the Danes see that with great disdain, shall we say. And so that could all be happening. Now, what could we do with Venezuela? Well, we could maintain the blockade. We could the blockade of oil. We could actually double down on the blockade of oil. We could continue to do strikes in the country. We could do raids in the country. We're not going to invade and occupy the country, but we could do a lot of things that would really destabilize the Venezuelan regime and possibly open up. But that could open up into a civil war. And do we want a civil war? Because then you're going to have a bunch of more refugees. About a fourth of the population has left Venezuela during the Chavez and Maduro years. And, the countries are all around it are kind of flooded with Venezuelan refugees. Could we absorb even another outflow of refugees on that scale? I don't think so. So that's a real problem. That's something we're going to have to calculate closely, is what are our next steps? And we do want to probably avoid having a massive civil war, and we're not planning on invading in there. And of course, there'll still be questions. Was our operation legal? Then again, in the real world, does it even matter? But certainly they're going to bring up other things. But I don't know if it was any less legal or more legal than what we did with Panama, than what we did with Haiti, than what we did in Iraq, than what we did with Libya. These things are always brought up. Makes for great political discussion, but not really clear which way that will go. So anyway, that's my take. That's Venezuela. That's what happened, and that's what we're looking at as far as what's going to happen next. Thanks for listening to Strat. You can also visit stratpodcast.com. You can go to my YouTube channel, Hal Kempfer TV. You can always go to my corporate website, www.gripsa.com. And thanks, and I hope you listen to the next one.
STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk with Hal Kempfer, is presented by the Mutual Broadcasting System and is always accessible at stratpodcast.com, as well as most leading podcast portals, including Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. For more of Hal Kempfer's current events media appearances, please visit halkempfertv.com. Be sure to like and subscribe to STRAT at your favorite podcast provider.